Hey, this is Jack Baldwin with Raynard Custom Homes. You're listening to By Design, and we have our next installment of our Sustainability Spotlight with Renewable Farah. Farah, how are you today?
I'm great. Happy New Year. How are you doing?
Ha- Happy New Year. I'm glad we're still saying Happy New Year halfway through the month because I like
Yeah,
to go Happy New Year until Groundhog Day. That's how I am.
I agree, and especially when you're not seeing folks, you get to catch.
Yeah, yeah, we got to catch up this morning on a lot. We had World Cup to talk about. You had a really awesome trip to Italy to talk about, and anybody who follows you on Instagram, like I do, got to see some really cool pictures from your trip.
Yeah, definitely a good time for travel, especially as we're winding down with the pandemic and you need a getaway and to see new things. And hopefully the new year brings a lot more travel and adventures for all of us.
Yes. Well, for those who have not met my friend Farah, I think this is your fourth time doing a by design podcast with us. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
So please go look at those past recordings. They're tagged with the title Sustainability Spotlight. So it is in reference to a series that we've started in October to talk to homeowners about how to get sustainable solutions out of their homes. So we really get nerdy. We really get into some good stuff together. Farah is an architect in the New York area with local government. She's a lead certified or lead accredited architect, so really knows her stuff and really has a passion for bringing green thinking. I don't know how else to put it, but
Exactly.
just yeah, thinking sustainable with sustainability in mind when we talk
Mhm.
about design, when we talk about construction of new homes. Today we're talking about residential energy code trends for 2023. There's been some shakeups in the past couple of years. What's great about talking with you, Farah, is that you're so close to governmental codes. You know what's going on. You really keep your eye on those things. So we're going to talk about trends, what's going on in codes, what things homeowners should understand when they're thinking about their new construction home. So we've got some resources, but the first thing I wanted to go into, the one I have heard about that what we wanted to discuss was grid interactive efficient buildings, or we call them GEBs. That may be a new term for people, even if it's trending in the construction industry. But what does that mean with energy efficiency for buildings, grid interactive efficient buildings? So, in preparation for our conversation, Farah, we got some slides together that I'm going to share. So I'm going to go ahead and bring those up so that we can kind of follow our conversation and our talking points together. So,
Yep.
right here, I'm looking at so this is an overview from 2020 Residential Energy Consumption Survey.
Yes.
This,
Yep.
yep,
So this is administered by the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Posted this during the
okay,
pandemic, and it's one of the most recent residential surveys that are out there in the market now. Again, this was posted by a federal agency. A lot of credibility to this. It's a good national representative sample of housing units. I think they had over 18,000 or so folks respond to this. So it's a really great representation of what's going on in the housing market, and this really sets the stage for a lot of the trends that we're going to be discussing in green building, whether it
yeah,
comes from codes, whether it comes from how the market is performing. The residential survey and COVID, it's showing that a lot of people are spending more time at home. But,
mhm,
despite people spending more time at home, we're seeing that residential energy use has actually declined by 4% in 2020 from 2019. So that's
interesting.
really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's also saying that the warmer winter months in 2020 reduced heating demand, which typically accounts for about 40% of energy use in homes. So that's just something to keep in the back of our minds as we see how energy use and consumption is trending. So we can scroll down to slide 9.
yeah. So we're looking at Florida and Hawaii.
Yes. So Florida and Hawaii had the highest percentage of all electric homes in 2020. And if you take a look at this graph, there's are as like almost as many states that are not all electric as there are with all electric in that mid range. So if you take a look a little closer at how this is, the United States is performing in terms of the quantity of all electric homes, it's really all over the board. Some
Yeah,
states are at that 0 to 20% range. Some are very, very few are at that high point, but it's a lot of mid range. So it's a little it's a little surprising to me. About 50% of these states are low range, and then the other half are in the mid range. So you could see we're all over the board here.
Right. And so one of the first things, the trends that we were discussing going into this conversation was the grid interactive efficient buildings, or GEBs.
Yes.
Is that what we're seeing when we're looking at this graph? When you say all electric homes, are those the type of homes that are GEB?
Yeah, so GEBs are kind of going to go a step beyond this, but
Okay.
it is part of the same discussion. So yes, our first trend with grid interactive buildings is the next step. I think it's the next wave for electrification and how we look at our power grid. So when we talk about grid interactive buildings, we're talking about building equipment and systems that work with the power grid. In other words, when you have a lot of clean power that's available on the grid, or when you have low demand, or when the grid is really clean, there aren't a ton of dirty emissions just being put out there because of the power grid. The idea of grid interactive buildings is that buildings work with the power grid, and when it's more environmentally friendly to draw power. So it's kind
Hmm.
of like this time of use energy efficiency. And so you have you have based on this real-time carbon signal that is given out to the building. When you have high carbon intensity, lots of emissions on the grid is going to give a signal to your home, and it's going to say, hey, this is not a good time to draw power. Maybe shift your load somewhere else. So it's kind of like this really smart interactive way of using the grid to be more environmentally friendly. And
Okay.
so that's going to be kind of the next wave. And I did an article on this with GreenBiz for the Sonoma Clean Power headquarters. Check that out. It's a really good example of this grid interactive grid engagement buildings. But there are homes in the US that are being tested out for this, kind of like as a pilot to see how they're
Yeah.
doing. It's been done on the commercial scale, and now they're looking at homes and how they interact with the grid. So it's
That's
kind of like the
awesome.
next step. Yep.
So what's the legacy solution? If this is the next wave, what's been typical beforehand?
So we haven't really been looking at how the grid performs. We've just kind of been looking at our own independent energy
Ah,
performance for buildings, but there
yeah.
hasn't been any concern really with how our building and our neighbor next door and our entire community, how does that grid perform? But now it's
Yeah.
like you have this microgrid for your home and its connection to the power grid and how it contributes and plays a role. So like if you shift
Interesting.
your building loads, and you use less energy at a time where it's just better for the grid, or it's more environmentally friendly, you're contributing to the community's emissions as a whole, these small microgrids that contribute to the larger scale power grid. It's a super interesting concept, and
Yeah.
if anyone wants to check out more about it, the New Buildings Initiative has quite a bit on it as well.
Okay. Well, so and what would that look like for a new homeowner, somebody who's building their home for the first time? Are there some solutions that are available to them to opt in to this, or what would be like a first step for somebody who's wanting to participate in a grid interactive efficient building solution?
Yeah, so I don't know that this is readily available on the market as of yet. And let
Hmm.
me correct myself, it's actually the New Buildings Institute. I
Hmm.
would encourage people to check out their website and understand how the pilot homes that have been participated in this, how they've performed. So again, I don't know if it's a market ready solution as of yet, but I
Okay.
know that it is fully under research and development, and they have implemented it in buildings, including homes, and it's worked. But I think when we have more and more homes in a particular community participating in this is when we'll be able to see the larger impact. But the
Oh, and
solutions are there. It's all about having this signal and building this software into your home that gives you that signal, and it the signal and the software speak to the building systems inside. So it's like the super automated smart home.
yes. Well, what's important about what you said is at least if you're thinking about this differently than legacy thinking, whereas we're not siloed, we're not just individuals. My home and its power consumption and outputs into the environment are not happening in a vacuum. So if we think about it in a community kind of way, I think that's the type of thinking that leads us to seeking out these types of solutions. Is I'm part of a grid, I'm part of a community, I'm consuming something, resources, and I'm putting out emissions. how can I reduce what I'm putting out and reduce what I consume? So I think just thinking about those solutions is important, an important first step toward seeking out ways to make things more efficient at home. So I'm glad that that was where we started with this conversation.
Exactly. Again, it's about being part of the community, and we talk about being grid independent and going off the grid, but at the same
Yeah.
time, most of our homes are not off the grid. We don't have a battery storage system to completely, not rely on the power grid. So if we are connected to the grid, how can we do that in a more environmentally responsible manner? How do we reduce our electric demand during what the grid is telling us is a very high cost, high carbon hour?
Yeah, well, being off the grid is a very difficult thing to achieve. Even as remote as you are, we do have clients who build in kind of remote areas in North Georgia. To you're still dependent on being part of the community, no matter how remote you are. I think that's an important thing to point out. But
Mhm.
um, another thing that a lot of our clients talk about that you brought up here right away was smart homes. Because yeah, technology's out there. There's some really great solutions we can leverage to automate solutions so that we can meter our consumption. So tell me about smart homes. Where's that trend headed? What is working for that, or maybe what's not working for that trend? But yeah, talk to me about smart homes,
Yeah.
please.
So I think that this is picking up even more, and it's, not necessarily a new concept, but in the last 5 years, we're seeing more and more readily accessible, easy to implement, user-friendly solutions that are available at your local electronics store. And it's
Hmm.
all just about the software and hooking up all your enabled devices to a particular system. It's really just about optimizing and automating your home. So you have sensors and controllers that can regulate your lighting, your heating, your cooling, your ventilation, so that nothing is
Yeah,
wasted. And there's this very user-friendly building management system, or like a software that will tell you your home's usage at the time and what system is sucking up the most power. And so it enables you as a resident to become a smarter building manager and lower your bills and lower your usage. And it kind of influences your behavior in the home as well. And
yeah,
after a certain while, I think that kind of trains you to just be smarter about how you use energy and just educate you, really. But yeah, it's all about automating.
yeah. Are there any solutions that you're a big fan of that you really like? That's uh, maybe something you have at home yourself, or
Yeah, I mean, smart thermostats, programmable thermostats, the Google Nest,
yeah,
all of these solutions just connect to your phone through an app, and it's so easy for anyone to use. Whether you're super young or super old and maybe just not technologically savvy, these
yeah,
are just so easy to hook up. You just need to buy a device that, can hook up to another smart device, and I think it's such an easy solution, and I think we'll see more technologies trending towards that.
right. The next trend that we were going to discuss is resiliency. Um, we talked a little bit about this with weatherization, and we do talk to builders who have different types of solutions that they implement during construction
Hmm.
for weatherization. I know we talked a little bit about greenwashing in our last conversation and some of the weatherization products that are out there that, but yeah, tell me a little bit more about what we can do to make our homes more resilient.
Yep. So again, we're going to see an increase in resilient homes, and it's the conversation is there. So the severe weather events that are happening, they're becoming increasingly frequent. This is just making an investment in resiliency even more critical, not just on the community level, but also on the individual level. We all want energy security, right? We want to know
Hmm.
that we'll have power and be able to operate during some sort of a natural disaster, no matter where you are. You don't need to be near a coastal zone for a disastrous weather event to happen, because precipitation is increasing, heat is increasing. These are all risks that can impact you no matter where you are in the US. And so there are lots of, passive and active solutions. So passive solutions would mean something like an airtight or a well-insulated building that is going to ensure that your home can survive, that your home can
Yeah,
serve as a shelter or just like a hospitable space, especially in areas where you have really extremely hot or extremely cold weather, that air tightness and well-insulated envelope will serve you just right.
Yeah.
Um, and then there are active solutions like battery storage, being able to island yourself from the grid, which can allow your building circuits and systems to continue to operate and remain online during a power outage. And then there are also other solutions like green roofs where, your rain and snow weather events will be prohibited by a green roof.
Mhm.
So you're going to see this trend, I think, popping up a lot more in coastal areas and places where people just experience a lot more extreme weather.
Right. Yeah, and we've seen like just a lot of very simple things you can do in the building process just to find good products. Like Zip is one that a lot of builders that we've worked with have implemented. And then striking that balance between shield and breathability too. You still want airflow to happen within the house, but we also want to secure places that there are gaps and there are loss of heat
Hmm.
and so yeah, there's some really good stuff out there. That's another conversation, I think, but it's important to a good takeaway is to ask your builder. I think from a resiliency point of view, talk about it in the design stages and talk about it in the pre-construction stages to
Hmm.
find out which products are certified. First of all, I know that that's a big thing with you, Farah, is finding things that are rated really well and have some integrity behind those ratings.
Hmm.
But also talk to your builder about which products can actually get you those types of effectiveness from the resiliency standpoint. But severe weather can hit a lot of places, and there's a lot of unpredictability in the world. So just being prepared is a great way to go about this. Um,
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah.
And I think I want to speak to a little bit more on some of the statistics on these slides, which I think are really going to
Hmm.
hit home the points you're making right now. So if we
Yeah.
actually scroll down to this next slide here,
Yeah.
it's just a general trend that we're seeing as far as energy use, consumption, where energy portfolio lies, what our fuel sources are. We see single family homes are more likely to use natural gas for water heating. Mobile
Interesting.
homes are more likely to use electricity. So although it's not necessarily in our countdown here, that that uh that use of mobile or modular or shipping containers, these sorts of
Mhm.
things I think are going to be cropping up more and more. I haven't seen this as much on the East Coast or up here in the Northeast at least. I've been hearing about mobile homes a lot more in the Midwest and West Coast as well. But
Right.
again, I think when we look at this particular information, this survey here, it kind of gives us a trend of like mobile homes are going more towards electric. Just something to think about.
Yeah, well, and that does tie into our next topic was electrification, which by that we mean getting rid of fossil fuels burning in the home. So gas being burnt for a heat source.
Yeah.
What are some things that are being done to promote electrification?
Yeah. So this is impacting all sorts of building systems and equipment. So you have everything from heat pump hot water heaters for domestic
Hmm.
water,
Yeah, that's right.
induction cooking.
Hmm.
So this goes into electric appliances as well. Something I want to bring up actually, it's really new and controversial in New York. Just recently, days ago, the New York State governor has been pushing a ban on gas stoves in new construction
Oh,
homes.
really?
And that's really controversial because, you know, folks are saying, well, this is my home. How can you control
Nobody
what?
likes to be banned for anything.
Yeah, that's true, right? So, but I will iterate that this is not going to impact existing homes that have gas stoves, but really just new construction.
Right.
There's a lot of conversation about how there are a lot of toxins that are being emitted from gas stoves.
Yeah.
This is a huge issue where you have recirculating hoods. And again, I don't really know the impact or the scale of how much these toxins are contributing to poor indoor air quality, but we know that a lot of the indoor air quality issues, the health issues are a huge contributor, and gas stoves certainly are a huge contributor to emissions. Um,
Right.
but this is something that I think we're starting to see a little bit more on the legislation, and the city and the states are thinking about this in terms of electrification, sort of like the new thing. Um,
Well, so I know there's some prohibitive measures that are being taken. Are there any incentives or Any incentivizers that are happening to get people to think more about electrification?
Yes, certainly. It's a great question. On the national level, the Inflation Reduction Act is giving a lot of incentives economically to replace old appliances with more environmentally friendly appliances.
Yeah,
Um, the utility providers as well on the local level, they are giving tax rebates and other sorts of incentives. If you install a heat pump, that's a popular one that I've seen in the
yeah.
States. And just even on the city level as well. So utility providers are providing those incentives.
That's good to know. And I think, um, yeah, people need to pay more attention to what's being put out there to incentivize you to take advantage of some of these programs, because every year there's something new. There's something new that comes out that's part of an act, like you just said. So I'm
Mhm.
glad you brought that to our attention because yeah, finding ways to save money, finding ways to get incentives is huge, especially around energy efficiency. There seems to be I hear about this mostly from you, but there seems to be something else that pops up throughout over the years, that give homeowners a good reason to think more energy efficiently about their appliances, about their building materials, about their solutions. So that's good.
Yeah, and also, there are a lot of misconceptions about, again, and we've talked about this in our previous podcasts, but the upfront cost of things versus the
Hmm.
life cycle cost and
Right.
savings. With a lot more of the private sector, like the utility providers, providing incentives, and then couple that with state or federal incentives that are being thrown out there, it actually becomes a pretty economically viable solution. And also where electric is really expensive at times as well, there are other ways to sort of offset that with other solutions. But we'll get more into that.
Yeah, but I just love that we're talking about things that you as a homeowner, as you go into a new construction, you've given us some really good food for thought already about what can I be thinking about with my relationship to my power consumption? What can I be thinking about in relation to my um, automated solutions? Just what can I do to think about when I go into my home and start designing it and start building it to get the best results, but also lower my impact.
Hmm.
So it's a really great train of thinking that we're going along, and it goes into building materials. So uh, I think that might be, at least from our perspective, we as a design firm, we get to specify for our clients all of the building materials that go into their home as a custom home design firm. So we really do feel like it's our responsibility to guide people well. So that's a big reason why we have you repeatedly on these sustainability spotlights, so that people can be thinking about things like their building materials before they start construction. So there's trends there too. You mentioned some of these about wood-based construction and naturally sourced products, but talk to me about what trends you're seeing in the building materials world. What
Yeah.
would you like people to be thinking about so that they can get the most out of their homes from this perspective?
Yep, excellent question. So, something that really is cropping up more and more in the building science world is embodied carbon. So,
Yeah.
we talk about building emissions. A lot of times, the numbers that you're seeing are in terms of operational carbon. So, that's carbon or these dirty emissions that are really associated with using a building. So, for example, the emissions that are contribute to the environment from using your heating, your lighting, et cetera, all your building systems, your appliances, et cetera. But embodied carbon now actually speaks to these other parts of the carbon life cycle that is associated with your building that you maybe are not paying attention to. But building scientists are predicting are going to, make up as much of your building emissions as operational carbon. Actually, about 50-50, it'll be equal. So embodied carbon is associated with raw extraction of your materials, transporting your materials to construct the home, disposing of those materials, that
Mhm.
entire life cycle associated with that process, other than just simply using your home. There are these other emissions that really are just make up a huge bulk as well, and we'll trend towards that. And
Okay.
so embodied carbon is going to be, it's being studied right now for different materials, but now there are a lot of online databases that you can look through. There's the Athena Sustainable Materials Institute, which has a database. There's EC3, where you can simply just plug in a material or a product and understand what the embodied carbon is for that
Yeah.
material, and then you can make a smarter choice about what to pick. But this is now leading the industry to think about other alternate materials. So, instead of energy intensive materials like concrete, we're looking at things like wood,
Mhm.
and just carbon sequestering materials that are more viable solutions. And so embodied carbon, again, this is going to be a big factor when we look at how much emissions are associated with our buildings. And I think this is actually going to lead to our next trend.
Mhm.
So not only just looking at building embodied carbon, but now our next trend that I really want to just highlight is looking more towards natural materials.
Yeah.
So wood-based construction and other naturally sourced products are going to become even more prominent as the green building professionals in that world scale back on embodied carbon in project sites. So when we're talking about more natural materials, we're talking about wood. So New York City, for instance, recently approved the use of mass timber, which is huge. We haven't seen that in New York City where it's more stringent and fire rating is an issue. But they're now
Yeah.
permitting buildings to be constructed out of mass timber for up to 85 feet. The
Okay.
International Building Code actually allows that number for up to like 200 feet or something a little bit higher. So it's
Yeah.
not new. But jurisdictions like New York City with huge building stocks are supporting this. Um, there's other natural materials that I think will continue to pick up as well as we look at, as we realize that a lot of the materials that we're using that are traditional, like glass, concrete, aluminum, just metals, have huge carbon impacts. Now we
Mhm.
can look at other natural materials like stone.
Yeah.
Stone is low maintenance, durable. There's no emission of toxins or chemicals into your indoor environment, and as
Right.
it's super stunning. It's gorgeous to look at.
I
You,
agree. I love it.
yeah,
Inside and outside.
exactly, and you don't really have to do much on the inside, right? It's just kind of like
Mhm.
this exposed finish that really just needs a polish after you've extracted. It's about as natural as you can get.
Yeah.
Um, And then bamboo is another material that I love, and I think we'll see more and more of that being showcased and being specified for projects. And because it's such a durable and lightweight material, it's an excellent choice for a natural
Yeah.
building material. And I'm sure you've seen it. There are a
Mhm.
lot of products now that are being made out of bamboo for all
Yeah.
sorts of interior applications, whether it's flooring or cabinetry or countertops. There's just such a use for it, such a versatility.
Yeah. And I just love that you've given us some very specific natural materials to be thinking about, like stone and bamboo and wood. So it's great to see that that is a trend that people are looking for more sustainable products to build their home with. And I think it's just important to ask those questions to your builder too, like what can you get a hold of that's
Mhm.
going to meet my value goals that I have for this home.
Yeah,
Um,
I think if you know that it's available to you as well,
mhm.
you don't necessarily have to go with the materials that your contractor is telling you about, but they
Sure.
could probably source natural material that is just out on a site somewhere and that can be reused or salvaged. So,
Yeah.
I know an architect who has sourced the stone from his property to build his home. And like that's
Oh,
the
neat.
most
Yeah.
sustainable, like, regional materials friendly exercise that you can get. So
Well, you get to incorporate the vernacular of what's around you too into your home when you do
exactly,
things like that. I mean, there's nothing more exciting in the world to me than to like have a home that is actually part of what's around it. So I
exactly.
love that.
Yep.
Let's talk about minimalism too. I think that's a trend. A lot of people talk about minimalism from a design perspective, but also from a size perspective. We hear
Yes.
the word tiny house more than ever uh, lately. So,
Yep.
what kind of a solution is that?
So all the trends that we discussed previous to this all lead to this minimalist design.
Yeah.
So energy impacts and usage, it all comes also with the large scale and complexity of a bigger home, right?
Mhm.
So I think because of these reasons, because of all these emissions contributions, we're going to see a lot more people looking towards, and I'm just going to put this out there, I'm going to manifest it, that we'll see a lot more minimalist homes and people will want to pose that. And I
Yeah.
think minimalist doesn't necessarily have to mean a tiny home. It doesn't necessarily mean having to sacrifice what you want in your residential space. But I think with like the rising cost of real estate in the US and with the emissions impacts that we're seeing, the increased energy costs as well, I think smaller homes are just going to become simply more affordable options, especially amongst like younger generations,
Yeah.
maybe people in my age in their 30s that are really just seeking alternative ways to minimize their carbon footprint. I think it's certainly picking up in that generation. And so I
Yeah.
think this conversation about tiny home construction and design and even modular homes that we spoke about before, I think that'll continue to crop up and we'll see more and more communities that um, will focus on affordability and developing communities around that theme.
Yeah. And I'm noticing the same thing, that people's values are just shifting towards just that way of thinking about design being, what do I really need? How can I get elegance and style with it not being overstated? And you can get something really beautiful stylistically um, without having to get overly complicated. Minimalism informs design in so many ways. It's not just the size of the space, but just how you treat the space. So
Exactly.
um, another, and I brought up this next slide kind of in prep for this last question. As far as trends go with electric powered vehicles, and I see here that it's saying, according to this study from 2020, we've got more than three-quarters of electric owners saying that they charge their vehicles at home.
Hmm.
I'm not sure where we're at today as far as how many people are um, incorporating electric charging stations into their home, but it is certainly trending that way, that you see more and more of it. But
Hmm.
speak to that with me a little bit about more readiness around solar panels, electric vehicle charging stations in the home. Where's that headed?
Yes. So this next trend about seeing more readiness for EV charging and solar, actually, I want to also just scroll up a bit and point you to another statistic to just speak a little bit on the solar. So
Yeah,
the survey is revealing more characteristics about single family homes with solar. If we just take a look at some of the demographics here, we can see that there are more single family homes with solar on the West Coast.
yeah,
It's more likely on homes that are owned versus rented. Between 2010 to 2020, we've seen an increase in the number of single family homes with solar. And if we now go back to this other slide down below, so you mentioned again that, over 75% of EV owners charge their electrical vehicle at home. That kind of just tells you a little bit about the infrastructure that's needed and that people are willing to put in that small economic investment because they're seeing a payout for owning an electric vehicle, and it serves their needs in the community. And so now this trend here, realizing all this, we're seeing a lot in our building codes that more and more jurisdictions are adopting this readiness.
hmm
So we spoke a little bit about this on our previous podcast episodes, but I want to bring up these details again and just with a little bit more detail. So the solar readiness zone means you've allocated a space on your roof and you've got the electrical infrastructure to install solar in the future. So you've got the electrical capacity and you've got the space. The electrification or electric vehicle charging readiness. Now you have circuits that allow you to electrify your home even more. So the codes are saying now for residential spaces that you have a space reserved in your electrical panel so that in the future, should you want to increase your electrical load through an EV charging station or whatever it is, electric appliances, etc., that you have the capacity to do so. But I want to talk a little bit now on the play between all this electrification that we talked about in the previous trends. I think that because the increase for electric on the grid is going up, and people are saying that, what if we electrify too much? What if we don't have enough power? That actually is going to help us out in the renewable energy sphere because that's actually going to lead to more demand for solar, right?
yeah,
We're going to look to more sources of renewable energy to offset that electric demand. So I think that there's like this really interesting balance that's happening right now where we have these competing interests for
hmm
electrification and solar, but they're both really positive. So I think we'll
yeah.
see more of an increase for renewable energy as well as the
I
demand
love
for maybe even EV charging increases.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's a great trend. I love seeing more electric vehicles, honestly. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, so I wanted to shift a little bit, look at what's driving changes this coming year. You mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act a moment ago,
Yes.
and some of the incentives that are put into that act. There's also the International Energy Code, or the IECC.
Yep.
There was some public comments there, but I think that's something you're close to, Farah. Tell me a little bit more about what people should know with what's in the Inflation Reduction Act that could help them,
Mhm.
and also what's going on with the IECC.
Yeah, so again, these are the two biggest drivers, as you mentioned. So these trends are really going to be facilitated by these legislative policies.
Hmm.
The Inflation Reduction Act, it's going to advance decarbonization in several ways. It's the largest national move that we've seen recently. So with the Inflation Reduction Act, there's definitely more of an increase for electric vehicles. Biden actually even announced prior to that that by 2030, half of American manufacturers, or 50% of electric vehicles that are put out there newly by manufacturers would be electric vehicles, and that's why we're seeing so many different makes and models across different American car manufacturers for electric. You know, you look
Yeah,
at your favorite manufacturer, like it's like, oh wait, there's an electric option by them too. So, um, the Inflation Reduction Act, excuse me, is also introducing more or promoting more low carbon materials and technologies. There's a
hmm,
lot of economic incentives for tax credits. There's funding available through the act for these sorts of technologies. There's also funding that's being put out there through the federal agencies for more R&D work on clean technology and low carbon materials, and that'll trickle down to our markets. And there's also more of a demand for federal projects that are also going to be using low carbon products in their construction. And I'm sure that those standards will be put out there and be emulated by the state and city projects as well, public projects. Um, and then super exciting, the IECC, the International Energy Conservation Code, you know, it went through a public comment period late last year, and it's currently being reviewed by the code committees and is expected to be released, I believe, mid this year in 2023.
oh, okay.
Yep. So this is just all new development, but the 2024 IECC now, it's definitely going to support the trends that we're seeing. So it's supporting electrical vehicle infrastructure requirements. Those were proposals that were put out there to really facilitate the electrification of the transportation sector. So that's coming, regardless of whether you like it or not. Renewable energy and energy storage ready requirements for a resilient grid, as we discussed.
Yeah.
There's also going to be more energy efficiency requirements for existing buildings. So that is coming your way, and those provisions will be in the energy code. But we'll get more details as the final version of that code is released. But I think, again, the trends that we spoke to are going to be supported by the provisions of this as well. And
Yeah.
Jack, I really want to just talk a little bit more also about some of the trends on that presentation. I think it's going to actually help our listeners understand a little bit of the background behind some of these trends and behind the legislation. So, few stats here to raise. So, households using LED lights for most of, or all of their lighting increased from 4% to 47%.
That's a huge jump.
5 years. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's massive, and that's
Yeah.
showing you like the impact of the manufacturing industry. And if you're only selling LED lights and that's what's saturating the market, and all these like fluorescent lighting and compact fluorescents are not necessarily being phased out, but slowly, being pushed away by other newer technologies to the
Hmm.
next big thing, that makes a huge difference. People are adopting them because it's readily available on the shelves.
Yeah.
So that's definitely huge. So this is speaking to our trend about these smart homes. About 40 million households had smart speakers in 2020. If you
Yeah.
look at the stats, also like these other components of the house, lights, temperature, security, TV, we're seeing an increase of these systems and equipment in the homes that are being automated or controlled. So that's that optimization, that automation is definitely
Hmm.
picking up.
Yeah.
Um, so 31% of households reported that their main heating equipment was 15 years old or older. So that's kind of showing us that, a lot of this equipment, which has like 20, 25, maybe 30-year equipment life cycles, they are due for a replacement. And so the legislation that we're seeing on phasing out fossil fuel burning equipment in homes and replacing them with something that is maybe electric or just more environmentally friendly, that makes sense. We have
Yeah.
perfect timing for that. So it's time to replace those. Let's bring in the new cleaner stuff for sure.
Well, I love that you're just showing us some statistics of things going in the right direction. It's
Yes.
encouraging. Yeah. And
Yeah.
also just like simple things we can do. Like what are, this is really low shelf stuff, this is stuff you can get at Target, or just ways you can think, like we
Mhm.
were talking about earlier, from the design perspective, what kind of questions can I ask about materials, solutions that actually pay off big time. So I'm glad to see that we're trending in the right direction here.
Yeah. Near 90% of households used air conditioning in 2020. So, when I hear conversations about, we're going to be demanding too much electric and going electric is too much power on the grid, where, well, we are already using so much electric,
Yeah.
90% air conditioning in 2020. If you replace that with a heat pump, a through the wall unit with a heat pump that's using that energy more efficiently, you
Hmm.
know, there's a lot to say about that. That already balances out your electric demand and portfolio. So just kind of want to plant that seed in people's minds. And this next slide here again speaks to one of our trends that we just mentioned,
Yeah, the
programmable.
programmable. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. So programmable or smart thermostats were used in 53% of households.
Hmm.
However, only one-third of households with these programmable or smart thermostats actually use the capabilities to control their temperature. And this goes to, I think, our first recording in our Sustainability Spotlight series, where we talked a lot about occupant education, building commissioning, and understanding how to use your equipment and your systems. That training, that education is so important. And I think this stat really speaks to it.
Yeah, it does.
So 27% of households experienced energy insecurity in 2020. So now
Right.
what do we mean by energy insecurity? It's people that had an energy insecurity that they weren't able to use the energy that they needed for their home for different reasons.
Oh.
Whether it's an economic disparity, they weren't able to pay their energy bills, um, people that received a disconnection notice from utilities, or their homes were at an unhealthy or unsafe temperature. So there's like this imbalance that you're not properly using the energy you need for all sorts of reasons, social, economic, etc. And it just speaks to the need that we need proper energy solutions so that no one is left out. Everyone has a solution and ready access to energy. And so as we continue to study electrification and renewable energy, there are these more stable, optimal solutions that are available to the homeowner. And I think that, the utilities, our building scientists, as we continue to diversify our energy sources and provide more options for people, these solutions will start to develop for sure. Specifically for the renter design, this podcast series, we really wanted to talk to people in the industry and get their insights so that our listeners, you folks that are tuning into this episode can get, really enlightened and understand different viewpoints. And these are from folks in the industry that, I'm sure based on their projects and their personal experiences can provide some really good insight. So yeah, we can take a look at some of these tweets. The question we posed again, in line with this episode, is what are some of the green building trends of 2023 that you're thinking are going to be popular and common? And
Right.
so, if you go through these, let's see, let me jump up to Karen Shapiro. And
Yeah.
are you able to zoom in a little bit, Jack? I have it open on my screen as well. Let's see.
Yes. A little tighter
Perfect.
in there.
Yep. So Karen speaks to end of life issues for buildings and building materials, choosing deconstruction over demolition, returning materials to the supply chain instead of moving them onto a landfill.
Yeah.
This kind of speaks to what we were talking about, responsible material sourcing. And then once we use those materials, how do we safely dispose of them? And also, how do we eliminate our emissions? Again, low
Returning them
carbon.
back to the supply chain. I really like that too. Getting creative about how can we put materials back into production.
Yep. And a point that I raise here, there are programs like LEED, for example, that have increased their credits and requirements on material and transparency and toxins that are in them, etc.
Yeah. I like this one from Cameron Sinclair. A lot of people are asking about the market when it comes to building or supply chain, interest rates, all of that. Um, he says, I see developers being a little more shy on sustainability, except where cost
Hmm.
is a factor. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
If you go to if you just hit show replies there, because I questioned, well, where are you seeing shyness and sustainability? Because I'm certainly not seeing that. He
yeah,
says, while the architectural industry is pushing, the big builders are worried about a recession or correction and are looking to access to housing versus quality of housing. And this
hmm,
kind of gets to this socioeconomic issue of affordable housing, and it's more about the quantity and being able to support a growing population versus maybe spending the time or investing in making a quality space that it's greener. So
yeah.
there's some push and pull there. Certainly, I can see how a big builder might think more economically, but we've tried to push again on this podcast that there are cheaper solutions and there are larger solutions, and you can hit the small fruit first.
Well, when I look at this, I kind of read between the lines and say there's reactive thinking and there's long-term thinking. There's short-term
Hmm.
economic thinking and there's long-term thinking, because long-term thinking is always going to weather the storm of building trends or industrial trends or economic trends.
So it's
Yeah.
integral automated blinds to modulate solar gain, provide better natural lighting and privacy. He mentions thick, non-operable insulating glass units, and he's talking about good thermal shutter or blind system. Physically
Yeah.
covering the opening with opaque insulation where transparency is unneeded, and I certainly agree with that.
Yeah.
Um, Passive house was a popular response to this thread. Lots of folks supporting that, advocating for that in the industry, and also few comments about retrofits and how existing building renovation is also going to be, a trend or something that we should actually be focusing a lot more on in 2023. Thanks for your passion on this, Jack, and to Runner Designs for promoting education to our listeners and really advocating for people to become empowered to learn, as we always talk about here on the Sustainability Spotlight series. Appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, we could keep going for sure, but I think this is going to give us a good setup for our next one, which I want to add. We would like to do live. So one of the things that we've been learning as we've been talking to people is that they really do like getting involved and asking questions in real time. So be on the lookout for information about that, where we would like to have this next conversation on Sustainability Spotlight be a live webinar where people can attend, raise their hand in real time, and actually get to talk to you. So Farah, have a great weekend. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you so much.
All right. And